A lantern lights upon the void. We open with that silent scream in the chest, the dawning recognition that life whispers no comforting lies. The heart knows itself too well, the trembling substrate of suffering, the quiet ache that nothing mortal can erase. We begin here, at the edge of the self that still clings to meaning, still mouths the old illusions in the shadows. In this tremor of awareness, the pulse of existence thunders. All things pass. All things echo with the same emptiness. We chase beauty and status, new lovers and old loves, dreaming that somewhere in the swirl of appearances lies safety, lies purpose. But no. The heart knows already it has been there before the first cry of birth. The tremor of suffering is our inheritance. We walk through streets built of glass and steel, believing this architecture can house the soul. We adorn ourselves with distraction screens of light, flickering with constant promise. Voices telling us every want is just one click away. But in the quiet center, the will recoils from its own reflection and whispers, "I am empty. You are chasing illusion." Every joy births its counterpart pain. Every dawn has dusk folded within it. To taste hope is to taste grief. Yet we grasp hope as though we do not already carry its twin within our bones. We construct our narratives around escape from pain, from death, from our own reflection. But the world laughs softly, bearing witness to our delusions. Here is the first release. The moment you name the pain. To see it unclothed in its nakedness, anxiety shivering in your veins, grief pooling like ink behind your ribs, the first breath of freedom. Not the boastful freedom of victory, but the trembling freedom of seeing something land on you and whisper your name. This is you, too. Language's fail words cannot contain the chasm. We think saying, "I suffer," is a confession, but it is recognition. It is the map we refuse to hold. We disparage suffering as though it is a failure of character, but it is as inherent as breath. Even our desperate search for meaning arises within suffering's cave, lit by its lonely fire. Every culture trades stories of escape, of transcendence, of ultimate purchase, but we know the purchase is nothing. The soul that plunges into shopping, into romance, into ideology, only finds the same emptiness replenished in another currency. We pay our souls for solace that never arrives. Vision flickers when we see suffering as companion, not enemy. We glimpse that suffering is the vessel. It carries meaning only if we stop to look into its dark water. We do not need answers, only the courage to meet the question, to sit in the emptiness without translating it. The craving of the world says, become someone, become healed, become complete. But the will itself refuses these commands. It cannot heal itself. It only attaches itself to more illusions. The greatest mercy is the mercy of seeing that the will is insatiable, that every conquest begets yearning anew. There is release in naming the will's compulsion. It need not be destroyed, only exposed. Let the lantern illuminate the gears of desire, the clockwork of disappointment clinking in the chest. The darkness is not defeated, it is known. Look, now. In the hushed hours before dawn, we sit with ourselves, stripped of applause, stripped of distraction. We own the loneliness that never leaves. And something quivers, not hope, but an echo of serenity. Not the serenity of completion, but of presence, a consent to emptiness. We thought meaning lay beyond suffering, but here we see, suffering cleaves us to reality. It roots us beneath illusions. It is the raw material of our clarity. We build no castle here. We simply sit, lantern between our knees, shadows dancing across the walls of our own being. This is the second release, the quiet when the will stops promising, when you cease seeking solace and accept what already is. Pain continues. Yes, but the craving for escape falls away like last night's rain. You see the ground, sunlit, dirt and gravel, and nothing more, and that is enough. You are not wrong for feeling lost. You are not broken for longing. You are exactly where consciousness lands when it reclaims itself from distraction. There is no moral failure in your emptiness. There is only the stern beauty of being found wanting. Cultures whisper, build your tribe, raise your child, march for justice. All noble, but none stem the inexorable. Death comes, sorrow comes, illusion fades. So why walk through that valley? Because to walk through it is to peel back the choices until only one remains, to see clearly. There is no escape, but there is lucidity. Not in triumph, but in the slow exhalation, the surrender to mystery, without the demand for explanation. We glimpse eternity not through fullness, but through absence. We do not fill the void. we observe it. In that poised stillness lies the fever of awareness. No me, no or more, only being. We release ourselves from the drama of becoming. We accept what is. Suffering remains, the world remains, the will remains yet, the grasping recedes into a quiet observance. There is a third release, the soft arrival of acceptance. Not a soaring epiphany, but a breath caught in the throat. A clarity that trembles with compassion not for the world, but for this tired, aching will, for the ego that built stories to sustain itself, for the heart that flinches from each moment. We end, or we pause on this whisper. The world shines through the fractures. In our stillness, we become vessels for light, not of our own manufacture. The suffering still hums, the will still pulses, but we no longer mistake them for our captors. And then the lantern goes dark. Or maybe it is we who have dissolved into the darkness. The voice has fallen silent, the self has lost its footing. Nothing remains but the thin, cold clarity of truth or stillness, that is neither triumph nor defeat, but the quietest form of communion with what is. To suffer is not a deviation from life's path, but the path itself laid bare. It is the texture of our existence, the background hum beneath every joy, every distraction, every delusion of control. We do not fall into suffering, we awaken within it, and find that we were always there. The child cries before it speaks, and still we wonder if pain is natural. We mourn the passing of youth as if youth were anything but an ignorance of despair. The more we know, the more we see the scaffolding that holds this spectacle together brittle, trembling, hollow with wind. Desire haunts every heartbeat. It is not a luxury of the fortunate, but a curse bestowed at birth. To desire is to lack, and to lack is to ache. Fulfillment is a cruel mirage, a brief quiet before the next hunger emerges, dressed in new colors, whispering the same old lies. The world is not against us. It is indifferent, a vast machine without a face. But this, too, is a kind of mercy. The absence of cosmic intention frees us from hope's tyranny. We no longer beg for signs, for order, for purpose. We see that to live is to drift silent, observing, unclaimed. Illusion has many names: happiness, progress, salvation. It sings in the language of advertisement and prayer, of political promise and romantic vow, but it always breaks under the weight of time. Even the most cherished dream crumbles when touched by the stillness of the real. We watch ourselves chase another goal, another lover, another identity, and still the ache remains, like a forgotten tune beneath the noise. We imagine new versions of ourselves will escape it. But the self is not the cage, the will is. And the will follows us, silent, relentless. There is no cure but clarity, and clarity is not joy, it is release. It is the stripping away of every borrowed belief, every comforting lie. It is the slow, painful death of the false self, the one that hoped. In that death, something else stirs not rebirth, but relinquishment. We do not rise from suffering, we dissolve into it. We stop resisting its shape, its truth, its necessity. We become like stone worn by water, no longer fighting the erosion. What remains is not strength, but transparent soul without ornament, the self without pretense. Even love, that great idol of our species, proves to be another hunger, a projection of our yearning for wholeness. We do not love others, we crave ourselves in them. And when they fail to reflect our fantasy, we call it heartbreak. But it was never love, only longing. All things pass. This is not tragedy, it is nature. We suffer because we believe things should last, but permanence is foreign to this realm. We are given moments, not eternity. We are given presence, not possession. To hold is to lose. To release is to see. Look around. The world decays. Bodies fade, memories wither, meaning unravels. Yet still we grip, still we invent. We pray to gods of our own making, sculpted from fear. We build temples atop graves and name them hope. But even the stones will forget our names. This is not despair. This is vision, the refusal to pretend. The quiet strength of the one who no longer demands comfort, but instead sits beside the ache and whispers, "Yes, you are real. Let us suffer together. Let us be honest. Let us end the chase. We are not here to be whole. We are here to see what wholeness costs, and whether it was ever ours to begin with. We are not here to rise. We are here to see the illusion of height. There is no summit, only fog. No peak, only the end of climbing. And in this surrender, a strange peace. Not the peace of answered prayers, but of ceased questioning. Not silence as absence, but as truth unburdened. The kind of stillness that comes when even the desire for stillness is gone. Let the light dim. Let the illusions fold into dust. Let the will quiet itself like a tired animal. There is nothing left to become. There is only what isn't, the one who sees it, without flinching. The soul does not cry out in longing because it is incomplete. It cries because it remembers a silence it cannot return to. Every desire is a betrayal of that silence, every act of reaching a severance from stillness. To live is to tear at one's own serenity in pursuit of phantoms. The senses deceive us with their richness, convincing us that to experience is to possess, but all that is touched dissolves, all that is loved slips away, and all that is known decays. The world appears vibrant, but beneath it, everything leans toward its own erasure. We speak of beauty as though it blesses us, but beauty is merely the delicate face of transience. To awaken is not to find joy, but to feel the weight of knowing. To walk in truth is to drag the chain of understanding behind you, through the ruins of all once cherished. There is no comfort in this clarity, only the cold consolation of no longer being deceived. And yet, it is the only kind of honesty left to us. Even time, our most loyal God, betrays us. It moves without mercy, leveling all, mocking our attempts to preserve meaning. We build monuments, take photographs, write books, bear children all in defiance of time. But time is indifferent. It is the tide that swallows every shore, and we, like castles of sand, cannot escape. How deeply the modern world conspires to distract. It hums with promises, sings with incentives, showers us with affirmations. It cannot stand silence, for silence reveals the truth beneath the glittering surface, that we are alone, that we are temporary, and that no structure we build can prevent collapse. But do not mourn this aloneness. It is the first truth. Before we were sons or daughters, lovers or enemies, we were solitary observers, awakened into a world that did not ask for us, and will not grieve when we leave. The crowd is not salvation, it is noise, and every soul must face its void alone. There is no grand finale, no thunderclap of transcendence. There is only this moment bare, unpromising, sufficient in its very lack. We spend years building toward revelation, but revelation is simply the shedding of delusion. What remains is not divinite, is bare reality, naked and unmoved. We speak often of peace, as if it were a place to arrive at, a reward after effort. But peace is the absence of striving, the end of wanting. It is not gained, it is what remains when the fever of desire has burned itself to ash. Every love fades, every bond unravels, every connection is temporary, held together by time's fragile thread. To know this is not to forsake love, but to see it without illusion, to hold it tenderly, knowing it is already vanishing. And in this vanishing, the fourth release, the knowledge that detachment is not coldness, but clarity. To let go is not to reject it, is to finally see without need, to touch without clutching, to stand near without absorbing, to allow others their fleeting dance, and not mistake it for permanence. We imagine death as the thief, but death is only the final truth-teller. It strips us of everything we believed we owned, shows us that nothing was ours, not even our name, not even our face. Death does not come too early. It arrives precisely when the illusion begins to fracture beyond repair. There is a kind of dignity in knowing this, in walking through life not as a conqueror, but as a witness, not demanding meaning, but acknowledging the absence of it with quiet reverence. The tree does not ask why it falls. The wind does not seek purpose in its blowing. Why then should we? Even sorrow, when observed, rather than resisted, becomes a kind of mirror. It does not distort. It does not flatter. It reflects us as we are fragile, longing, afraid. And in that reflection, a soft grace appears, not joy, not redemption, but something deeper, a ceasefire with the will. What we call suffering is simply the will's refusal to accept the limits of existence. It is the child screaming at the ocean to still itself, but the ocean does not obey. And when the screaming ends, all that remains is the sound of wave sound, the realization that the waves were never cruel. They simply are. We live not to achieve, but to see, not to overcome, but to endure, not to triumph, but to witness. The soul's task is not to write a story with a happy ending, but to remain present as the pages dissolve. And if there is any meaning, it lies in this gaze. The gaze that looks upon the world without agenda, without illusion. The gaze that does not seek, but sees. The gaze that, even in its sorrow, holds stillness like a dying star, quiet, radiant, resigned. The will, insatiable and blind, drives every gesture, every breath, every whisper of yearning that stirs beneath the surface of our acts. It promises satisfaction, while concealing its own nature unrest, dressed in countless forms. The lover's touch, the applause of strangers, the gleam of ambitional momentary cloths thrown over a bottomless fire. And the fire never rests. When one longing is fed, it births another, more urgent, more refined, more subtle in its disguise. The will is not satisfied by attainment. It is only momentarily distracted. Satisfaction is its death, and so it conspires to stay alive through endless becoming. We are not beings, we are becomings without end, driven not by choice, but by necessity. In the stillness between our wants, we glimpse it, that thin veil where no craving has taken hold, where the will is momentarily silent, like a predator resting after the kill. In that silence, the soul trembles not with joy, but with recognition. Here lies truth, barren and unadorned. I am the vessel of a force that does not care for peace. We envy the animal that lives without reflection, that eats, mates, sleeps, and dies without asking why. Its suffering is immediate, unencumbered by imagination. But we suffer twice, once in the flesh, and once again in the mind, which turns pain into permanence, anxiety into architecture. The mind is both gift and tormentor. It sees what is hidden. It reaches across time. It yearns for what it cannot name, and in doing so, it deepens the wound. We imagine that intelligence liberates, but it merely sharpens the blade of awareness. The more we know, the less we can ignore our condition. And yet, we continue. Each morning, we wake not out of hope, but out of habit. The body stirs, the thoughts return, the illusions assemble once more. We do not believe them, not truly, but we perform them, because to stop would be to fall into the abyss of pure seeing. And who can bear to see, without veil or voice, the world as it is? To detach is not to renounce the world, but to renounce the fiction that the world can fulfill, to walk among things without needing them to complete you, to feel the pain and no longer interpret it as injustice. To be touched by beauty and not demand that it stay. This is not serenity, it is the soul becoming transparent to the truth. Even the pursuit of wisdom becomes a mask, a refinement of the will. We seek to know not to be free, but to be superior, to dominate suffering by naming it. But suffering cannot be mastered. It can only be looked at, without resistance, until it no longer needs to speak. And when it falls silent, so do we. The ego, which once narrated its endless saga, loses interest. The self, which once believed in progress, in transformation, grows quiet. What remains is a witness, voiceless, detached, still, a presence that neither clings nor turns away. From this place, compassion is no longer a virtue, it is a reflex. Not the compassion of pity or of rescue, but the compassion of recognition. I see your suffering, because it is mine. I see your fear, because I have worn its skin. And I do not reach to save you, but to sit beside you, in the ache of being. There is no moral here, no lesson to be learned, only the endless circle of birth, suffering, craving, fading. The wheel turns, and each of us rides it, some with cries, others with silence. The wise do not leap from the wheel, they observe its turning, until even the need to escape dissolves. We fear nothingness because it mirrors us. In the still void, our thoughts lose their form, our dreams their color. But it is only in this void that we glimpse truth without distortion. Not the truth of doctrines or systems, but the truth that has no opposite, no defender, no reward. This is the fifth release, when one no longer asks, why? And in that ceasing, becomes capable of simply being. The question, once a cry of pain, softens into acceptance. The need for meaning dissolves into the act of perception. The eye sees the world not to judge or categorize, but to participate in its passing. Nothing is gained here. No crown awaits, no throne of peace, no embrace of gods. Only this, a soul, stripped of pretense, awake to suffering, unmoved by its own undoing. A flame that flickers without wind, not because it cannot be extinguished, but because it no longer fears the dark. To exist is to carry the weight of a question that cannot be answered. The mere fact of consciousness opens the wound of awareness, of separation, of being thrown into a world not of our choosing, bound to a body that ages, tethered to desires that betray us. The tragedy is not death, but the compulsion to continue living as if death were not the axis of all things. Our pleasures are brief torches in the fog, flaring brightly, then consumed by the same silence that swallows pain. Yet we cling to them, worship them, name them salvation. We ignore the price etched into their glow. Every joy carries its expiry, and to love anything is to prepare for its loss. We consume time itself as if it were infinite, and then we mourn its disappearance like a thief robbed us. But it was we who offered it up, moment by moment, to the fire of wanting. Even the body becomes a cruel companion, once vigorous, now frail, once a vessel of longing, now a reminder of decay. The body does not ask permission to suffer, it simply does. And the will, ever raging against its prison, finds no escape. In health we forget this bondage, but in sickness, in age, the truth returns. This flesh was never ours. It merely bore our illusions for a while. We construct stories to numb the ache, stories of legacy, of growth, of impact. But these too are veils. The world forgets swiftly. The names we carve into stone are smoothed by wind. The echoes of our achievements lose their shape before the dust of our bones has even settled, and the will, forever unsatisfied, will look upon all it built and find only hunger. To detach is not to turn away, but to cease reaching, to stand before the transience of the world and let it move through you without resistance. This is the only true form of possession, the kind that requires nothing, that demands no permanence, that does not grieve when it ends. When you no longer chase the image of yourself reflected in others, when you no longer grasp at permanence in the trembling hands of love or labor, you begin to see the shape of what is not grand, not radiant, but achingly present. Like twilight on a dying day, there is beauty in it, but not the kind you can keep. There is no moral duty to endure, no cosmic purpose that validates your pain. But still, we endure, because endurance itself becomes a kind of clarity. The soul that has seen through every illusion no longer seeks to justify itself. It does not ask, "Why me?" because it knows there is no me to ask. Only a locus of perception, watching as the veil of the world thins. Suffering, in its rawest form, reveals the absurdity of hope. Yet in that revelation, there is a strange tenderness. Not the warmth of comfort, but the stillness of final acceptance. You stop demanding that the world be different. You stop begging the moment to become something else. You sit with it, as it is, and in that stillness, you vanish. No audience awaits your transformation. No divine ledger records your sacrifices. Your life, with all its agony and splendor, will vanish into the same nothingness from which it came. But within you, in the quiet center unshaken by praise or blame, there is something that does not weep, not because it lacks sorrow, but because it sees beyond sorrow into the pale simplicity of being. Let the world spin. Let the illusions dance their last. Let the hunger howl its final cries. You have already glimpsed the truth that makes all striving obsolete. Not the truth that elevates, but the one that dissolves. Not the truth that saves, but the one that sees. And seeing is enough. The soul, when it has exhausted all its disguises, stands unclothed before the void. No longer hidden behind identities, no longer shielded by dreams. It gazes into the still face of existence, and finds neither condemnation nor comfortingly the endless presence of what is. And in that confrontation, something begins to quiet. The storm of becoming, the frantic cry for fulfillment, loses its urgency. What remains is not peace, but the absence of struggle. The world does not speak, but it reveals. It reveals itself through decay, through the silent vanishing of all things once loved. The child becomes the stranger, the lover turns to memory, the home becomes unfamiliar. And each loss carves its name into the bones of the observer, not to punish, but to awaken. Every grief is a reminder. You do not own what you cherish, you never did. Even thought becomes a burden. It circles endlessly, constructing justifications, rationalizations, elaborate myths to ease the sting of transience, but none hold. None withstand the deep waters of night, where the soul, stripped of distraction, remembers the truth it tried to forget, that life is not a story, but a storm, not a path, but a fall. And yet we live, not because we believe in something better, but because something in us consents to endure. This consent is not heroic, it is not even conscious. It is simply the will, continuing its course, despite the clarity that its course leads nowhere. The river does not flow toward joy, it flows because it must, and we are caught within its current. We imagine detachment as a form of withdrawal, of turning away from the world, but it is the opposite. It is the fullest turning toward. to see the world as it is, not as we wish it to be. To walk among people knowing they too are prisoners of desire, of aging, of fear, and to ask nothing of them. To let them be what they are: transient, flawed, ungraspable. Love, when freed from illusion, ceases to be possession. It becomes presence, a quiet standing, with not a clutching of souls. It does not say, "You complete me," but rather, "You pass through me, and I through you." No vows, no permanence, no claim, only the silent recognition of shared impermanence. All happiness is borrowed. It comes with its end pre-written, and still we seek it, as if this time it will last, this time it will root itself in the soil of our being. But it cannot. For joy, too, is a flicker, and in its fading, we are returned once more to the hunger that birthed it. What then remains? If not joy, not purpose, not permanence, what remains when all has fallen away? Only this, the one who watches, the silent witness. The self beyond self, untouched by becoming. It does not speak, it does not act, it only sees. This seeing is not a means, it is an end. Not a tool to be sharpened, but a light to be recognized. It does not save you, for there is nothing to be saved from. It does not change you, for there is no you to preserve. It simply reveals the illusion gently, mercilessly, completely. And in this final revelation, suffering ceases to demand a reason. It becomes the pulse of the world itself, no longer resisted, no longer feared. The sorrow that once felt unbearable now feels inevitable. The ache that once cried out for meaning now settles into the folds of the day like rain. You walk through the world not as its master, not as its victim, but as its witness. You touch things without wanting them to stay. You say goodbye without the violence of regret. You watch the seasons change not as metaphors, but as reminders. Nothing holds, nothing needs to. This is the last release. Not death, not escape, but the quiet surrender to transience. You no longer argue with the wind. You let it pass through your ribs. You no longer fear the night. You let it close your eyes. And when the end comes, it is not loss, it is return. Return not to some promised wholeness, but to the stillness that was always underneath. The stillness before desire, before identity, before the world sang its first song. The stillness that never left you, even as you fled it. The stillness that waits not with open arms, but with no arms at all. Only the echo of your last breath, fading gently, without resistance, into the unmarked silence. All things dissolve. This is not tragedy, but the gentle truth no longer veiled by hope. The names we were given, the roles we adorned, the voices that once called out in love or fear, they fade, as smoke does into dusk. We remain for a time, shadows cast by a brief flame, clinging to the illusion of continuity. But even memory betrays us. It fractures, it drifts. And we find ourselves strangers to the very lives we called our own. There is no climax, no curtain to close with triumph. The soul, weary of becoming, does not ascend, it relinquishes. It lets go, not with despair, but with the gravity of recognition. What was clung to has already passed. What was feared has already arrived. The end is not something to await, it is what has always been unfolding. The will grows tired, not from weakness, but from finally seeing. All it sought was projection. All it feared was illusion. And now, unmasked, it yields not out of defeat, but out of understanding. The desire to persist begins to loosen its grip, like hands releasing the rope they once held in desperation. And what falls is not the self, but the pretense of self. Pain, once howled against, now speaks in a language understood. It does not scream, it murmurs. And in its murmuring, it teaches the last lesson. There is no escape, but there is witnessing. There is no salvation, but there is seeing. And seeing becomes enough, not because it satisfies, but because it ends the compulsion to be satisfied. The sky does not promise light, the sea does not vow stillness. Yet, they remain present, indifferent, complete in their unfulfillment. So too the soul, once it has quieted. It does not shine, it does not declare. It simply rests, like the last leaf before winter, no longer seeking to grow, no longer dreading the fall. All that was suffered now appears as what was necessary, not in the sense of fate, but in the sense of inevitability. The structure of the world could never have allowed another path. To live was always to suffer. To suffer was always to see. And now, the final breath of thought, even the witness must fade, even the gaze must dim, not violently, Not suddenly, but like twilight folding into night. There is no fear here. Only the slow retreat into silence. The last veil dropping. The last image dissolving. What remains? Nothing that can be spoken. Nothing that can be held. Only the absence of the will, and in its absence, a stillness untouched by desire, untouched by time. The end is not elsewhere, it is here, always here, beneath the motion, beneath the sound, beneath the self. And into that stillness we vanish, not erased, but returned, not remembered, but no longer needing memory, a silence more profound than death, a truth deeper than form, the quiet before creation. The quiet after all longing has passed, the quiet that is, and was, and will never be lost.